In the summer of 2016, the Prime Minister promised to fight against what she called the burning injustices in British society. This weekend, the 4 key members of the Prime Minister's own Social Mobility Commission resigned, citing little hope of this government delivering a more equal society. What more damning indication is there that the government are failing? It's clear that this country has a problem with wealth inequality. A recent report by the Resolution Foundation states that 1% of adults own 14% of the nation's assets. And at the other end of the scale, 15% of the British people own no assets at all. The reality is now that wealth inequality is hitting our public sector workers, our social workers, our police officers, our firefighters, the very backbone of our society. This is in large down to the public sector pay cap, one of the most iniquitous policies that this government has come up with. A policy not just of this government, but of the previous coalition government with the Liberal Democrats, who I might note are also not in the chamber today. This in large... So, in 2010, when the coalition government was formed, the country was told it needed to make more sacrifice to reduce the national debt. David Cameron's exact words were, I'm sure we all remember them, "We're all in it together." Yet 7 long years later, debt is still rising. The date for the eradication of debt, as my honourable friend from Crewe and Attridge said, has been pushed further and further back, and all of our public sector is in crisis due to the harsh austerity economics of those 2 governments. All in all, we've seen the cost of living rise around 22%, while public sector pay has not just stagnated but fallen back in real terms. This government's created a system where the people who rely most cannot afford to live in 21st century Britain. This doesn't scream of society where we're all in it together to me, and I'm sure not to the other members in this room, although maybe not all of them. Therefore, it's not entirely reasonable for our public sector staff to ask, what has their sacrifice been for? Is it not reasonable for nurses to ask why more and more of them having to take up second jobs or use food banks to feed their families? Is it not reasonable for firefighters to ask why 27% of their colleagues have contemplated suicide due to the stress of reduced budgets and increased pressures? Is it not reasonable for teachers to ask why teaching staff and their families across the south of England are ending up homeless because their wages have skyrocketed? While the wages have stagnated, while rents have skyrocketed. I recently spoke to one of my constituents who has worked in social care for over 20 years. He explained to me the effect of what essentially a 7-year wage cut has had on his life and his family's life. He could have put down a down payment on a house. He could have paid for his child to go to university or saved up for a more comfortable retirement. But yet, despite all of this, he told me how they would have accepted a temporary pay cap to protect the services that he has dedicated his life to. And he is not unique, but the norm for our public sector workers, not just in Leeds North West, but right across the country. And I'm proud of him and all of our public sector workers. However, the reality is that while they've had to make their money stretch further, services they work for have been slashed. And they are working twice as hard for less money to keep cash-strapped services from collapse. The Institute of Fiscal Studies has warned that the public sector faces a recruitment and retention crisis, a direct result of the pay cap. On any one day, there are 90,000 vacancies for social care jobs in England. Just under 340,000 social care employees leave their jobs every year. Schools have been forced to increase money spent on advertising teachers by 61%. That's a waste of money in our education system going on recruitment rather than retaining our excellent teachers.
Will the honourable member give way?
I will give way. Come on,
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Would it make sense for the government to reverse the ludicrous tax cuts, the incredibly wealthy and the corporations, amount to some £19 billion, to fund public servants and end the pay cap?
An excellent point, which if the honourable member for Cheshire and Amersham had stayed in a place would have heard the answer to her question from my honourable friend from Weaver Vale. It's absolutely right. If you look at a corporation tax rate, they have fallen consistently, but large corporations have not paid their burden of taxation. If they came and they paid their burden of taxation, it would be to the good of all society, including their own workers and shareholders. So to carry on my point, so We're also seeing the Metropolitan Police have taken the extreme measure of asking retired police officers to return to work to help them cope with demands. This is not only a moral argument, and it is a moral argument, but clearly the pay cap is a false economy, and maintaining it is costing billions. It is not just a recruitment crisis which is costing the country billions. The TUC has also shown that pay cap has meant public sector staff have spent £48 billion less on the high street since 2010, undermining private sector jobs and private sector pay, as well as public sector jobs and public sector pay. I want to ask a simple question to those on the other side, those that are left, of the House. Who will you turn to when there is no one to put out the fire in your houses? Who will you turn to when no one keeps criminals off your streets? And who will you turn to when there's no one to care for you when you're sick, or you're old, or you're unable to care for yourself? The hypocrisy of this government is staggering. Praise is lavished upon our public sector workers, but it's not reflected in their pay packets. Praise does not pay the rent, praise does not feed a family, and praise does not heat a home. Thank you.
Hear, hear.